What is going on, gunfighters? Another installment of Q&A. This one's kind of a special edition. Now, the patrons have had the other portion for a long time, but I answer their questions all the time. I thought what I would do to show you guys a little bit of what Patreon gets, and I thought because they were good questions and you guys would glean from it, I'll add in. I thought I would answer some of those and include them here for everybody, for the benefit of the class. With that, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting tactics, your random questions, all the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. With that, for credibility, I'll put in the bio. If you want to skip it, skip around 2 minutes. While you're either listening to it or skipping it, hopefully you'll like, subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. Hit some stars, whatever they do on the platform you're listening to this on. It would be appreciated. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder, certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength, it's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. This one's from Michael Segur. And it is, I agree, where's the shotgun innovation at? Why do you think Ruger doesn't make that 7615 anymore? I hope they revive it like they did with the Mini 14. Now, he said Ruger, but I think he meant the Remington 7615. If you've listened for any length of time, you'll know I'm a fan of the old school Remington 760, 7600. They're great. They're pump-action rifles. Think of the Remington 870, but as a rifle. And as a full-powered rifle, they came in a lot of different cartridges, from the most common, I think, being 30-06. They came in a lot of other calibers. This is kind of the police version of that, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense because for a long time, myself included, as a law enforcement officer, we ran Remington 870s. Remington 870 police magnums or or Wingmasters or whatever, we ran those. So it makes sense if a cop is familiar with that, if that's his standard long gun, to give him, if he needs a rifle, a 760-ish type thing, which would be the 7615. Made a lot of sense back in the day. That said, and I don't really agree with this, but we've seen a large shift in police culture, the militarization of the police force, and going to AR-15s as their standard long arm. I'm not saying that's better, I'm just saying that it kind of is what it is. That said, I think it's a fantastic rifle if you want a really good crossover and or you live in a restricted state, a shall not be infringed, has been infringed kind of place. If you are looking for a really good crossover, tactical, practical, hunting, defensive rifle that's manually operated, that's legit. Do I think Remington is going to make it again? I don't think so. At least not anytime soon. And here's why. They're having a hard time getting their stuff together, making their core. Like, I bought one of the new production when they came back out after bankruptcy and started making guns again. I bought an 870 because I missed the 870. I thought, I got rid of my 870 in the past, and I really should have kept it. Let me go out and get a new 870. And that thing wouldn't run for anything. You'd think a pump-action shotgun that they've been making since the 1950s, they'd know how to make it. I mean, they came up with the thing, and that thing just wouldn't run. Right, brand new out of the box, it wouldn't run. Pump-action Remington 870. So if they can't get that right, I think it's probably going to be a while before they should or before they will consider making something like the 7615. I would like to see them make the 7600 again. Probably they should focus on their core and actually getting those to run well first before they expand out. But a good question and a really good rifle, and thanks for bringing it to our attention. Appreciate you, Michael Segur. Next one is from Jay Fountain and some numbers. Have you heard or used a Model 1400? It's a semi-auto made by Winchester. My grandfather passed it down to me, and it's a great, reliable, and smooth shotgun. I don't have particular first-hand experience with that gun. I did have and really, really enjoyed another gun that I sold that later I regretted because it was just made so well. A Winchester 1300. The Winchester 1200 and 1300 are fantastic. They're kind of a development of the Winchester Model 12, which became shortly, I think, the 120, which became the 1200, and then the 1300. They are phenomenal. And they're kind of the last of the breed of American-made Winchester shotguns. The Winchester shotguns now are made in Turkey. So that is what it is. But the SXP, I think, traces a lot of its lineage, which is a new Turkish-made shotgun, traces its lineage, I think, pretty clearly, linearly back through those models. However, those American-made ones are just sweet and smooth and elegant, and they kind of lost the race. The kind of the big two that dominated were the 870 and the 500 series, and they were both good shotguns, but the 1200, 1300 was by no means second tier to those. It was made just as well. Why it didn't take off as much, it was used some in professional service, just not as much. But I think every bit as good a shotgun as any of those other models. And they're just buttery smooth. Now, as far as the semi-auto 1400, I'm aware of them. I've never run one. I've never owned one. But if they are made anything like the 1200, the 1300, just you talk about a beautiful, elegant American workhorse machine made in America by Americans. Just a great gun. So if it's anything like the pumps, then yeah, it's probably an awesome gun. Now, one guy said he carries a CZ83, and you got me there. He didn't ask for it. It's not a question, but I didn't know about the CZ83. I was not aware of its existence, so I looked it up. It says discontinued in 2012, 380 auto. It looks strikingly similar to a Walther PPK. There may be some minor differences. It looks a little bit different. You can tell if you're really looking at it that it's not a Walther PPK. It's a 380 or 9mm Kurtz if you are of the European persuasion. It's a good-looking gun. The Walther PPK was always a good-looking gun, so pretty cool, and I wasn't aware of it, so if you see one, if it's made like most other CZ handguns, it's probably rock solid. You can tell real close up if you're an aficionado of those things that it's not a PPK. But if you saw it from a distance, you'd be like, oh, the James Bond gun, a PPK, if you were kind of semi a gun person. They may have made other models, but the one I see here when I looked it up is a kind of a two-tone stainless steel, which you're probably aware that I like that. So if you're looking for like a mid-size, because a lot of the new 380s are these uber small, subcompact, baby micro, uber tiny, whatever you want to quantify them as, fit in a shirt pocket kind of guns, which is not the best for running and gunning. If you want a little bit bigger 380, pretty cool. And again, I wasn't even aware of this gun's existence. So the CZ83, pretty cool. Another guy says he carries a P365 XL. That's kind of a go-to standard nowadays. It's the longer version of the P365. Kind of, maybe not the first one, but the super popular first Micro 9 that was decently shootable and kind of really dominates the market. So don't really have much other commentary on that, except it's a good solid choice if you're going to carry a smaller gun. All right, I'm going to give the name on this one. Is Big Sims. He says a 2.5-inch 686 plus. So that's a 7-shot 357 Magnum, which is pretty cool. He might enjoy that modern fighting revolver episode that either is going to be out before this or should be out shortly after this, depending on scheduling. But doing a whole philosophy episode on modern fighting revolvers. So that's pretty cool. A 686 plus, 2.5-inch. Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0, 10 millimeter, 4.6 inch. So this guy, he's in the more power is better kind of camp. Let's just say that. This one's from Dylan. What's your opinion on the Springfield Prodigy? Well, my opinion is it's made by Springfield, so it's probably not very good. My opinion is that, based on my training and experience, if it is a Springfield handgun that actually works, it will be the first one, maybe the second one that I'm aware of. Most of their guns are junk. I don't know how they stay in business. There are some exceptions. The Springfield M1As are okay if you don't mind a cast receiver, but they work fairly well. But like their 1911s, no. Any of their XDs, no. Literally never. Not sometimes they break, not they break a lot. I have never seen one make it through a professional training course. I've never seen a professional carry one that didn't have problems with it. So what do I think about it? I mean, you know my rule about staying away from something unless it's been out for 3 years. It's not there. Now, I want it to be good. I don't want Springfield to make junk, but their handguns tend to not work. And I mean, like, not sometimes they have issues. I've never seen one that made it through a professional training course. The only handguns I'm aware that are semi-reliable that I've seen run in competition for like the sealed carry matches are the Hellcats. Those seem to work okay. They got rid of that backstrap safety thing or whatever, but most of the XDs, their 1911 lines, I've never seen one that I would be confident in. So right there, here's the thing. Does an STI Staccato 2011 for a fraction of the price that's supposedly just as good sound too good to be true? Well, it probably is. Here's the thing though, what's it for? If it's for a range toy, then get it. It's probably going to have a bunch of issues. It's probably based on other 2011 designs. So get it, replace a bunch of parts with quality parts. Because to be fair to Springfield, their 1911s and stuff, their frames, their slides, the metallurgy is not horrible. So if you want to get one and dump a bunch of money into it for potential issues, and you're not going to trust your life to it, go for it. If you're asking for like a professional duty use carry gun, no, I wouldn't even know. There's a thing about 1911s and ergo 2011s. You can make a cheap, reliable 1911. You can make a cheap, accurate 1911. To make a reliable, accurate 1911, that costs some cheddar. That is labor intensive. So, it's kind of a shame I don't have better thoughts on that, but those are my thoughts on it since you asked. I don't know what your use case is for this. If you just want a really good 1911 in 9mm, I would say get a Colt, whatever flavor suits you. A Colt Gold Cup 9mm 1911 would be my first choice, but Ruger makes a really good one that are in the same price range. If you really want a double stack, and you don't have the money to get an STI 2011, which they're not cheap, my advice is go look for an old Canadian or U.S. pre-Remington made para-ordnance double stack. These for years and years were the big competitor, the big rival to the STI. That was the big competition. You'd see a lot of both of those at competitions. Well, eventually para-ordnance got bought up by Remington and that whole debacle. But if you get the pre-Remington ones made really well, either the early Canadian ones or the other ones, and they're not really well known outside of the old school competition shooting circles, but they run and they're super dependable, super reliable. They're tanks. So if you're looking for that amount of money, I would look at finding a used Canadian or US made pre-Remington para-ordnance. If you want to run an optic, have it direct cut. You're still going to probably be around the same price range. It's going to be a rugged, reliable gun. Now, all guns can have issues, and 1911s in general require more maintenance and upkeep, so hopefully you're up for that. Because if not, you're probably not going to be happy with any 1911. But it'll be rugged, it'll be reliable, and that's what I would recommend if that's what you're looking for. So hopefully that helps. Thought I'd try something a little bit different. For the patrons, this is going to be an early standalone episode. They get a lot of Patreon-only content. This is, instead of Patreon-only content, going to be Patreon early and ad-free content. And I'm going to plug it into, at least that's the plan, God willing, plug this into the Q&A. So you get some extra Q's and A's. But the patrons will get it early without having to listen to ads. This is just stuff that came recently from our Patreon chat. And this is stuff that we talk about all the time. And this is just going back a couple of days to give you an idea of what you're missing out on if you're not a patron. And it's not just me in there. It's a lot of guys helping a lot of other men. Iron sharpens iron. As iron sharpens iron. We're helping each other. Maybe not as good as like a actual face-to-face MAG, mutual assisting group, but it's a good way to have like-minded, strong Christian men helping like-minded, strong Christian men. These are just a few things that came from in the chat, Q's and A's, and some other stuff that I'd like to sprinkle in here to the regular Q&A so you guys get a flavor. And maybe, not to lie here, just to be upfront with you, hopefully it makes you want to become a patron. And this is, again, just stuff we talk about all the time. So instead of waiting maybe a month to get your question answered, this is stuff that gets answered all the time, on the daily, in the chat. Now, I've already answered this in the chat, but I think audio is a little bit better. What are my thoughts on, and this is from Pat, thank you, Pat. My thoughts on 243 as a special purpose, I'm going to throw in there /DMR rifle. Let me start by saying this is an awesome idea. 243 is one of my all-time favorite calibers. They're not my kids, right? I can tell you that I have favorites and show you I love the 243. I've killed all manner of beasts with 243, and don't freak out when you hear this. But deer, elk, wolf, like I have slain all manner of beasts with 243. I like 243. I think it is one of the best deer calibers on the planet, period, end of sentence. And I've taken elk with it, as in plural. And that is knowing limitations, having a lifelong experience with hunting, knowing my range, not doing the crazy long range stuff, knowing good proper shot angles, and that kind of stuff. And I've never shot at an elk with a 243 and not stood over it. So I'm not telling you that you should go out and hunt elk with a 243, but that just shows you some of the capabilities of the 243 if you know your weapons capability, and more importantly, your capability and proper ammo selection and all that stuff. Know God, know yourself, know your weapon. But I think it's I wouldn't call it a phenomenal elk round. I would say it's good for me because that's what I had and that's what I was most familiar with. And at the time, I didn't have a lot of money to have a specialty elk rifle and a specialty wolf rifle and a specialty deer rifle. I had a Remington 700 I bought from Walmart that I slayed all manner of beast with. That being said, it is a phenomenal deer round. Any deer size, serve it. I don't care if it's whitetail or mule deer or antelope. It's a good round for that. Now, what about for this roll? I think it has the potential to be one of the greats for this roll. If you look at 243 as far as power goes, it is sweet as far as compared to even the best cherry-picked load in 223 556. It just to be nice, it just goes to the bathroom all over it with as far as power and trajectory and all manner of things, right? It just does. It is way more powerful than that. You might think, well, you're comparing it to apples and oranges, and I would say yes. The more fair comparison would be to compare it to 308 because it's a 308 based cartridge. 308's a good round. I think for this, potentially the 243 could be better. You got less recoil because that's how physics work. You have really good velocity. You have the potential for really good ballistics coefficients and bucking the wind. And you have more than enough power for any kind of defensive, this type of roll use. So it's got a lot of potential. Here are my issues with it. Most rifles chambered in this are hunting rifles. They are hunting rifles and a, more classic twist rate for a classic hunting type round with hunting type accuracy and with more traditional, let's say type 1 hunting where point blank range, aim at deer, hit deer, which I really like because I like to spot and stalk hunt. I'm not one for all these electronics when I hunt. I'm not one for shooting off a bench. I'm not one for a lot of that stuff, just sitting there and spinning on a dial. I tried that years and years ago before it was the hot thing, and I quickly got away from it. I enjoy the skill of stalking and getting close to my prey and my quarry. And by close, I mean like a couple hundred yards. And for that, with a 243, you don't need any of the dials and the whiz-bang stuff and the rangefinders. You just don't. It's efficient the way that it is. That being said, for this kind of roll, it has great potential for that, but most of the weapons are suited for hunting-type bullets, hunting-type accuracy, hunting-type twist rates. And this is what I mean by that. If you're not a ballistics nerd, the traditional, you can get outside the parameters, but traditional weights in the 243, you're going to find like 75 grain up to 100 grain. And again, you can find outliers, but that's the big ones. 75 to 100 grain. Great. And I would lean more towards the heavier for bigger bodied deer. But phenomenal choices for varmint and deer. You're talking usually like a flat-based hunting type cup and core bullet, which is great, again, for deer hunting. You find more classic type twist rates that top out at 100 grain. More of this type generation 2 kind of technology where you're talking about sleeker, longer, more aerodynamic, which is really all ballistics coefficient means. Its ability to fly through the air, buck the wind, ballistics coefficient. Better BC bullets for this type of special purpose rifle roll. Like a designated marksman special purpose type roll. Most off-the-shelf 243s aren't geared for that because they don't have the twist rate to spin those heavier bullets, those longer, sleeker bullets. And people often think of the twist rate having to do with the weight of the bullet. That only applies if you're comparing cup and core bullets to cup and core bullets. But it really has to do with the gyroscopic stabilization of the length of the bullet. For instance, you could have a 100 grain cup and core traditional bullet that a 243 stabilizes, but you could have, I don't think they make this, but just you could have a 100 grain copper bullet, which is obviously going to be much longer because copper is lighter. It's less dense than lead. So it's going to be much longer. It may not, and I'd say a normal rifle probably wouldn't stabilize a 100 grain solid copper bullet. So the stabilizing the bullet has to do more with the length of the bullet. That said, most of these newer kind of Gen 2 high BC bullets, which you would probably want to take advantage of in this, aren't stabilized by the traditional, or aren't meant to be stabilized. You may find one that does, but aren't meant to be stabilized with these more traditional twist rates. So you're looking at probably a custom rifle. Also, if you're loading it, and we'll get to the hand loading later, but you're probably, if you don't want to, the bullets are longer, which means that you either have to load them to the standard overall length for these traditional rifles usually, and eat up a bunch of your powder capacity because the bullet is longer, so you're eating up some of the potential of the 243, or you got to load them longer, which is not a big deal if you have a custom rifle. So if you get a custom rifle with a little bit longer, not longer action, but an action that is maybe, let's say, carved out in the right places to allow the seating of a little bit longer bullet, a little bit higher BC bullet, a little bit more match accuracy, which is another good thing about these later generations of bullets. They are crazy accurate. Good for bucking wind, which is the number one skill. Drop is not even really that important if you're talking about using a range finder and dialing. It's the bucking the wind that's really your sealing the deal as far as making the shot goes. It's calling the wind. It's just a skill and an art in and of itself. And the less you can get the bullet to be influenced by the wind, the greater your hit probability goes up at range. And these modern bullets really can do that. Again, to take advantage of that, you're going to want a custom barrel probably. And a lot of these newer barrels in these newer calibers already come with fast twist rates. But the 243, again, not so much. It's, from days of yore, ye olde hunting deer caliber. Also, if you want to take advantage of this, because most of these, again, are hunting deer type loads out to 300 yards, which they're great for that. That's what it's made for. If you wanted it for a DMR rifle and take advantage of these attributes, you're probably going to be hand loading. So if you're going to hand load and load the longer bullets out a little bit farther to not eat up the powder capacity, talking about like 105 grains, 107 grains, maybe even longer and heavier with a proper twist rate and a little bit, let's say, action where the feed ramp has maybe been, the feeding of the magazine area has maybe been made just long enough. Maybe I'm just talking maybe a 1/10 of an inch to make sure everything feeds right. And some rifles may do this automatically. But if you got that and you got a fast twist rate, and you probably want a shorter barrel than the traditional hunting weight barrels, we're talking about this type of rifle. So if you're going to go with a custom rifle route, it has a lot of potential. And then to realize that potential, unless you get like a semi-custom, somebody to make your own loads, which that's going to be a spendy proposition. But if you're going to hand load for it and you know what you're doing hand loading, you could have a potential for a great, DMR or special purpose rifle with less recoil, faster follow-up shots, tremendous bucking the wind ability, and plenty of downrange terminal performance. So it's got potential if you're going to do a custom rifle and a custom hand loading of loads. That said, as much as I love the 243, a more practical turnkey solution is the 6.5 Creedmoor. And if you ask me which one of those calibers I like the best, I like 243, but the 6.5 Creedmoor is, I think, the first really successful of this second gen of cartridges. It was designed for this to be a turnkey solution for long-range shooting. You could buy a rifle off the shelf with a decent twist rate. You could buy a rifle off the shelf with a tight chamber. You could buy a rifle off the shelf with these really high BC bullets readily available. And 6.5 Creedmoor is good for this. And there's already a bunch of these kind of rifles chambered for it, like a Savage 110. I think it's based on the 110, but it's the carbon fiber lightweight. They even make a tactical version with detachable box magazines rifle. That'd be phenomenal. And it's chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. Or many other ones they're not traditional long barrel, heavier weight, less maneuverable. Again, they're made for a different purpose. They're not bad rifles, but I think for a turnkey solution for this, unless you're willing to just dump a bunch of money because you love 243, your better turnkey solution is get a 6.5 Creedmoor. It already comes, again, it was designed to be a turnkey solution for this type of issue, to shoot long range, to shoot precisely, to have manageable recoil, and to be accurate, and to use that bucking the wind type bullet. If you look at the trajectory of a 6.5 Creedmoor, it's not impressive. It's not a good long range cartridge because it's got super flat trajectory. In fact, again, the 243 go to the bathroom all over it at reasonable ranges, and even at longer ranges with really high BC bullets, it does really well. But it bucks the wind really well too. And again, if you're talking about dialing and using rangefinders and having dial turrets and all that stuff, which you probably are, if you're talking about this type of thing, the turnkey solution would be the 6.5 Creedmoor. And you might think, well, I forgot one about the 6 Creedmoor. 6 Creedmoor is good. 6 Creedmoor is kind of like the second gen of this. It would kind of be like the modernized Gen 2 of this, of the 243. They're both 6mm bullets. 243 is a 6mm bullet. 6mm bullet is .243. The 6mm Creedmoor is basically, without getting into technical data, it's basically what we talked about already in a turnkey solution. The only issue is that 6 Creedmoor, depending on where you live, but in a lot of places, is not anywhere near as available in as many different loads. Even in the South, which I'm driving south right now on the East Coast, even in the South, which you don't need a 6.5 Creedmoor in the South for almost anything, unless you just have a ton of land and you're hunting on a bean field or something. But it's all over the place, 6.5 Creedmoor. So, if you're looking for a good solution to this with good available ammo, unless you're really talking about competitive shooting where the 6 Creedmoor would have an advantage in some disciplines, 6.5 Creedmoor is just probably your best turnkey solution bet. But it is a really good question, and I thought it deserved a decent attempt at a well thought out answer from me. So thanks, Pat. This one was a good question. I'm not going to mention the name that asked it. This was via Patreon. It was a comment on the Patreon page. It was a good question, but I might pee in some Cheerios, so I don't want to offend the person that asked it. So I'm going to leave the name out, but a really good patron who I appreciate. But they asked my thoughts on kind of shooting rests, shooting bags, shooting sticks, that kind of thing. And he asked about this specifically in the context of hunting. And here's my honest answer. I don't think there's much practical application for that. And the way that I like to hunt. Now, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up hunting out of a stand. I don't like it, even when I was guiding, unless I absolutely had to. I like to be on the move. I don't even generally like to sit down for very long, if I sit down at all hunting. I like to spot and stalk and still hunt. That's the way that I like to hunt. I think bags and rests and stuff are useful for zeroing your rifle. After that, I don't even like them for practice. You should be practicing in the way that you should hunt. And here's my advice if you want to become a practical, deadly stalker, still hunter, tracker of game. After your rifle is zeroed, practice in your field positions. Be decent at offhand shooting, especially offhand. That should be your primary position. You should be good at shooting offhand. And offhand, if you're not familiar, does not mean with your left hand. That would be your support hand shooting. I'm talking about shooting unsupported, standing unsupported. Get good at shooting standing unsupported. Get good at shooting kneeling, and kind of a forgotten position, sitting, kneeling, sitting, and prone. If you're good in those basic positions and improvised kind of versions of that, you will be a much better hunter if you spend your time doing that, and I think a more successful hunter than if you spend time trying to fiddle with sticks and with bags and with rests. They're a crutch, and you should just try not to use the crutch. And when I was guiding, I'm not going to say I never use sticks, but I really try to get my client in close enough that even people that were not great shooters could make the shot without sticks. I'm not going to say I never use sticks, but I try to discourage it. Be decent, again, in those techniques. Of anything, I would say, learn to be good with a sling. And a good sling, know how to make a good hasty sling, which is okay. Best part about making a hasty sling is you don't have the sling swinging around so that messes up your offhand shooting. But a hasty sling is okay. What's better is the old military style slings, either a web sling or the old leather slings. I use those in competition shooting. People still do use those quite a bit, those old military slings, both web slings and leather slings. Those are fantastic. If you know how to use them, if you know how to make a loop for your bicep, for your upper arm. If you want to look into like a Rhodesian sling or a Ching sling, those are also really good. Now think about this. I mean, Marines are taught to get their rifle and practice with it in those practical positions. And Marines are known for being good riflemen. And I was blessed by God to be an expert rifleman in the Marine Corps. I can get in a prone position with no support, no artificial support, and make hits on a man-sized target with iron sights with a .223 at 500 yards. What distance are you hunting deer at? Even if you half that in a decent prone position, shouldn't you be able to, with an optical sight, with a LPVO, a 4-power scope, make a decent hit on a deer prone at 250 yards, which is way farther than most people shoot deer. So I think you're going to waste more time just trying to chase gear, and a lot of people do. If you just want to go hunting to buy more gear, then just buy more gear. But I think, honestly, you will kill more game if you spend that time and money actually being out in the field. Like, spend that money on gas and go drive somewhere and walk around in the woods. Spend that time dry firing, even if it's in your house, with a little teeny sticker that you get at Dollar Tree, and practice your different positions. And get good in dry firing at calling your shots. Knowing when to make the shot is a good skill for a rifleman. A great skill for a rifleman and a hunter is knowing when not to shoot. Knowing when to say, oh, that's a nice elk, but you know what? I don't have the shot. I'm just going to have to pass. That gets my respect as a guide. I never got mad at a client when he's like, I don't have the shot. What would upset me is when they didn't have the shot and they took it anyway. And the way you know that is you know how to call your shots. That's great in competition shooting. It's great in real-world gunfighting, offensive, defensive type stuff. Because I don't care how fast you are, it's better and faster to get your shot the first time than to miss and shoot again and recover and make another shot. Better to hit. So knowing when and what shots you can make, that is what I would focus on. Not the bags, not the whatever next widget thing is supposed to be. A decent sling, because you need a sling anyway, right? So why not have it aid you in shooting? Of all those things, sticks sometimes are helpful. The sticks sometimes can be helpful if you are like stalking and stuff in tall grass and that kind of environment, bushes. And you might be in a position where you want the rifle facing forward for long periods of time, and you may have a fleeting shot opportunity, like a big animal between a couple of bushes, a bear between raspberry bushes, blackberry bushes, some fairly dense area with some small open areas where an elk, he's in the area, that elk, you've jumped him once and he's in this ravine in this dark timber. And maybe you want to have that rifle up, but you might be there for a while, right? Still hunting, you might need to be at the ready for a long time, and that can get tiring. So of all those things, sticks, maybe. But, if you have a good high ready position, to me, I prefer that. That's up to you. Of all the ones, a stick maybe, and I would say get the stick, either the dual sticks or the monopods that you can use for walking and hiking anyway, because those are handy for not falling in a creek, for not twisting your ankle, for going down really steep areas or really steep sideways areas, like it's really steep and you're walking sideways on a hill. Those can be pretty handy. So of all the things, sticks have some utility, but really just, I would say, learn to shoot good offhand, kneeling, sitting, prone. That's my advice on that. Bags for zeroing your rifle. After that, when you go to the range, if your rifle is zeroed, get off the bags. Get off the bench. Unless you hunt out of a deer stand. I mean, if you hunt out of a stand, which is not, I'm not putting that down. If that's how you put meat on the table, that's fine. It's just not how I like to hunt. If you're going to hunt out of a stand and you're going to rest your rifle on the 2x4 that is the side of the stand that you made, then shoot off a 2x4 on the range, I guess. Bring a 2x4 and set your rifle on it to get practical practice. But other than that, I'd say no. If you're talking about spotting and stalking and still hunting, I think more game is missed trying to get fidgeting with your gear. More I've seen as a hunter and a guide, more opportunities missed because people are fidgeting with gear. They've got too much of a high magnification scope. They're trying to get this thing ready, that thing ready, when they should be trying to get the shot ready. And I think you might have opportunities where those things would have helped, but I think overall, again, you miss more opportunities at game, and you miss more putting more game in the freezer fidgeting with the gear than you would just by being a good marksman and knowing when to make the shot. That's my honest opinion and my honest advice. I don't want you to spend money on gear that you're not going to use or that is going to cost you more game than you get. And you kind of already have a bag. It's your pack, right? If you're going out hunting and you have a pack, learn to throw that down. Like when you're dry firing in your living room, throw your pack down off your shoulder, get your rifle down on it, and help that in a decent supported prone position. Because you're going to have your pack anyway, right? If you're packing an animal out, then you've got a pack. So you might as well know what area on that pack makes a good rest. And even then, I won't say I've never have. I can't recall ever actually doing that, but it's a good skill to have, using your pack. Generally, my go-to is those standard positions: standing, sitting, kneeling, prone. And be good at those, and be good at calling your shots, knowing when to shoot, and more importantly, especially for a good shooter, is knowing when not to shoot, knowing when, you know what, I need to take an extra half second, or I need to modify my position, or I just don't have the shot. And that's just a reality. Anyway, I hope that helps. It was a good question. The next one. Do I have any good knife fighting resources, especially on YouTube? I believe if memory serves, this was asked by Joshua. Now, as you might imagine from my background, I have a decent amount of knife fighting training experience. I have a decent amount of that kind of experience. I don't want to misrepresent myself here, though. I consider myself an expert at a lot of things as far as shooting and gunfighting and stuff like that goes. And I don't mean that to be cocky. I mean that God has blessed me to have a lot of training and skills and abilities, and He's blessed me to survive a lot of things that only by the grace of God did I survive. And I try and use those talents and abilities to help others. That being said, I don't want you to think that I've been in a bunch of knife duels where, like, I've got a knife and the other guy's got a knife and we're just, like, dueling it out, like Count of Monte Cristo style. I have been in several altercations where knives were involved. I was never the aggressor. I was never, like, knife on knife fighting. My experience in that is purely from the training aspect, purely from doing that in training just in case. I have been in several knife encounters where, by God's grace, I'm still talking to you now. I'm still breathing. That being said, that was defense. That was the other person had a knife. I don't want you to think that's kind of knife wielding, knife fighting, like knife on knife kind of thing. I've been in some altercations where the other people had knives. That being said, I did have some good resources, and I pointed in some right directions. Now, I did a post on Patreon. Most of the Patreon stuff is just for patrons, like paid members of Patreon. That said, I'm going to make the knife fighting stuff, the extra, and these aren't me, these are good, what I think are good resources, studies on knife fighting, studies on knife defense, knife fighting techniques. I kind of compiled those and I put those on the Patreon post. Just put them in one place. And again, it's not even mine. Like, I don't get any money from that. I'll put it free on my Patreon page. You can go to my Patreon page. There should be a link in the show notes. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to give any money. It's just where it is. Right? I'm not going to spell out a link for you audibly. That would be a disaster, right? You trying to copy that down and write it down and then put it in your browser. So just go there, right? It'll be free. You might have to scroll back a bit, but it will be free, and it'll be a public post on my Patreon page. So click on the Patreon page if you want to see some, what I think are decent knife fighting compilations, and especially studies on what works and what doesn't work, real world information, and some basic techniques. But here's the main advice that I gave him. One of the things that I kind of like in the knife fighting thing is knives should be felt and not seen. So that's one thing. Also, there's a lot of like specialty knife techniques. Like, I'm not going to pretend, and I'm not a big fan of karambit knife fighting. If you are, that's cool, but that's not me. I don't have any experience in that. I have some knife fighting experience, not karambit. I try and stay away from that kind of thing. But if you want to dedicate yourself to that, and we could debate the effectiveness of that or not, but I don't have any experience in that, and karambit specifically. But here's my main thing. It should be building on your hand-to-hand combat skills. From your wrestling, grappling, ground fighting, boxing, Western martial arts skills. It should build on that. Very basic, down and dirty, effective moves, right? If you can throw a good punch, then you can do a good stab. Same principles apply, right? You don't throw your punch out and leave it there so somebody can grab it. You don't stab with your knife and leave your knife out there so somebody can grab it. If you can throw a good, forceful punch, either left-handed or right-handed, you should be able to do both, then the knife is a giant force multiplier. The knife is a giant force multiplier as far as reach goes, as far as lethality of your punch goes. My general go-to thing, and when I was still professionally gunfighting day to day, was a push dagger. Even when I had a gun on me, a push dagger is a great tool, and a lot of fights, even when you have a gun, end up on the ground. I like a push dagger because I'm fairly familiar with brawling. I'm fairly familiar with punching and wrestling and things like that. I like a push dagger for a dedicated tool. That said, for a EDC crossover tool, just a decent carryable size knife. And you get into the same quandary with a carry knife as you do for a carry gun. And I brought this up in the Patreon chat, it's like the classic paradox for a carry gun. Obviously, for carrying, a smaller gun is easier. For actually shooting and fighting, a bigger handgun is easier. So you got to balance that. Same thing with a knife, right? I've got quite a bit of knife fighting training and experience with a K-bar. A K-bar is a great fighting knife. It's not a great EDC knife. You get the idea there? I have a really tiny, it's not even my primary carry knife, but I have a really tiny, one of those baby kind of folding pocket knives with a little teeny pair of scissors and a little teeny blade and a little teeny pair of tweezers. That's a great pocket EDC knife in my pocket. It's not a great fighting knife. Again, that's not my primary EDC knife, but I carry a usable size fixed blade knife on my belt. Not the best fighting knife, but it's a decent bushcraft knife. It's a decent fighting knife. It's a decent EDC knife, and I'll actually carry it. Probably not carrying a K-bar for my EDC. You get the idea. You get that same kind of paradox. But if you're carrying a knife for EDC, I'm big on the duality of survival guns. They should be good at putting food on the table, and they should be good at defense. An EDC knife should be good at all kinds of tasks. I would say a couple of general rules. You should be able to skin a deer with it, assuming you know how to skin a deer, because that's one of those things. Don't try and fix a software problem with hardware. You can have the best skinning knife in the world. If you don't know how to skin a deer, the knife's not going to do the work for you. But it should be able to skin a deer. Should be a decent knife fighting implement, a decent defensive implement. It should be decent at and hardy enough to do decent tasks. Notch a piece of wood, cut some rope, be able to get a full grip on the knife and use it and bear down on it hard. Those kind of things. And a usable, and I guess almost anything is better than nothing. I really would advise you against trying to use a non-locking folding knife. But basically, most knives are going to be better than nothing. But you get what I mean. A decent defensive knife. And again, you could have the best knife fighting knife in the world. If you don't have any skill or you don't have the man parts to be able to wield it effectively and the courage to actually do it, it's not going to do you any good. In fact, you might just be arming your adversary. But I would define that as a 3-inch or longer blade. But for EDC, I like a 3 to 5 inch blade. a 3-inch or longer blade. I prefer fixed blades. I know most people carry folders. And a full grip handle. A decent grabbable handle. A lot of people think about blade. Is a clip point better than a drop point, better than a spear point? And what about this and what about that? What about the handle? Don't overlook the handle. You can have a really good blade, but if you can't grab it and wield it effectively, that's a big part of the equation. So don't overlook the handle. And I can't stand finger grooves, guys. I don't like them on guns. I don't like them on knives. Talking about and I'm not the most experienced knife fighting trainer person, but there's a couple of different grips that I like to use. Even if those finger grooves line up for me, let's say on a straight, traditional thumb wraparound grip, they probably don't line up for me when I have a reverse grip support hand, because I want to tangle the guy up with my grappling ability and use the knife once he's tangled up. Right? So the finger grooves aren't going to line up for a reverse grip. Ice pick style hammer fist. Again, this should be a building on your already existing grappling hand-to-hand combat ability. Right? You can do a good hammer fist. You can do a good reverse grip ice pick. Stab when you got your adversary wrapped up and you got his arm pinned with your other hand. Stuff like that. It should be an extension of that. So if you don't have either one, I would say first develop your hand-to-hand combat skills before you even think about adding on the knife. Because I've honestly been in more fistfights and brawls than I can remember, and I have not been in any fights where I was the aggressor with a knife. Now, I still like the skill. I still like to retain the skill. But you're probably way more likely to get in a hand-to-hand combat than you are to need a knife. But it's a good thing to have, and it's a good skill to practice, and it's something that I still practice and try and, I guess, pun intended, stay sharp with. But that's some of the advice. And again, if you want to go to the Patreon page and scroll down that knife fighting resource, a couple of decent videos and resources on the knife fighting thing. But it's a good question. And I think it is absolutely something you should have and be acquainted with. The use of a knife as a tool and as a weapon. Even me, I spend the bulk of my training with a gun. This is, gunfighter life. However, I still do train with a knife, and I still carry a knife. Even when I was full-blown, had a, commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, and I had a SCAR 17, and I had a STI, 2011 on my hip, I still had a knife, and I still practiced with it. There may come a time when it comes down to that. Even as a professional gunfighter, a lot of things end up as hand-to-hand combat on the ground because they haven't done anything yet, and if you shoot them, then you go to prison. That's how that works. You can't just shoot everybody. And nor would that be, even if it were legal, even if I had a license to kill, I got to answer to God. But hand-to-hand combat on the ground is a real thing. A lot of police with gun belts end up grappling on the ground, and they aren't justified in using their gun. But that can quickly escalate because every fight you get into becomes a gunfight because you bring the gun. If you end up rolling around on the ground, again, you should have good ground fighting skills, and somebody grabs for your gun, well, now the knife might get introduced because if my gun is still in my holster, I know quite a few techniques to keep the gun in the holster where I have the advantage and I have the leverage, and I might break some of his fingers or something. But to get him off of me as a get-off-me tool, as a make-space tool to get up and to get my gun, because now it is a gunfight, then the knife comes into play. Little tip on that, I generally like to carry my sidearm, my handgun on my dominant hand side at 3 o'clock, and I generally like to carry my go-to defensive knife on my weak side, so my left side somewhere, so I have a decent use of force multiplier option on both sides of my body in case I'm pinned on one side. Right, if I'm on my side and laying on my gun and I've got a 250-pound dude on top of me pounding my head into the pavement and I can't get to that gun, I would like to have a decent option on the other side. And when I was doing quite a bit of this rolling around and grappling with the guns and stuff, that's when I moved to carrying a fixed blade knife. Because for years, like many people, even when I was in the military, even when I carried a full-size K-bar in combat and stuff, I would carry a folding knife in my pocket. And for years of my civilian life, even when I carried a gun, I would carry a folding knife in my support side pocket. But when I actually started doing the training and the rolling around on the ground, I realized I might be able to get the knife out of my pocket, but getting it out of my pocket and deploying it and using it effectively is far harder with a folding knife than a fixed blade. So I experimented with carrying a fixed blade, and I found that I liked it better. It's a simpler tool. It's less likely to malfunction. Like I try and get it out, but I don't get it all the way locked, and I'm trying to use it and it folds back on my own fingers, or I actually can't get it out and unfold it into the fight fast enough. The fixed blade to me is a better solution if you can legally carry a fixed blade. And I would even take like a 3-inch bladed fixed blade over a 5-inch folding knife. I just would. I think it's a lot more likely to actually get used. And talking about the knife fighting and the knife fighting type stuff, one of the core skills, kind of like one of the fundamentals, if you talk about the fundamentals of, concealed carry being the draw, one of the fundamentals of the knife defense techniques is getting the knife into action quickly. Because you could have the best knife in the world, but if you can't get it into action in the time that you need it, then it doesn't do you any good, right? You need to be able to get it out and deploy it. So that should be like a primary skill that you practice. Wherever you carry your knife, carry it in the same place so that you can quickly deploy it. Even if you don't carry the same knife, if you're going to carry like a folding knife or a fixed blade knife, I'm not saying you have to carry the same one all the time, but carry in a similar manner that you know where to grab it and you know how to deploy it. Like if you're going to carry a folding knife with a thumb stud and you carry it blade up and your support pocket so you can grab it, put your thumb in one way, open it up, and practice deploying that every time. Because under stress, you're going to do what you've practiced. So that's some advice there. But one of the core skills, get that knife out and get it into action. Practice doing that. And build on what you should already have for hand-to-hand combat skills. I am not a big fan of the crazy Eastern martial arts, mostly because of the pagan garbage, false deity worship that is involved in a lot of that Eastern martial art garbage, even yoga. Stay away from that yoga, pagan, idolatry garbage. But Western martial arts, boxing, wrestling, and build on that with the knife. It's a force multiplier for your punch. Anyway, some thoughts on that. Again, check out that Patreon post. You might have to scroll back a bit depending on when this comes out. I haven't scheduled it yet, and I've already posted that post on Patreon. So check that out on Patreon. Again, it'll be free. You can go to the Patreon page. You won't have to become a patron. You can just look at it. But there's some good videos that I had and that I had knowledge of that I posted there for the patrons already. Now here's just some fun things we do in the Patreon chat that I asked. Favorite gunfighter, and I listed a bunch of options. It's a poll, and I've been doing a lot of these mostly because I figured out that I actually could do it. It's like when you find the new thing, you're like, oh, that's cool, I'm going to do it. So I've been doing a bunch of polls. One of the polls I did was people's favorite gunfighter, and I added some people, and somebody else added somebody that I didn't even think of. But just so, if you're curious, our favorite gunfighter as a whole, not my personal favorite, but our favorite as a whole in the chat, Theodore Roosevelt, American president, gunfighter, right? Leading the Rough Riders. San Juan Hill. Rough Riding Teddy Roosevelt. I can respect that. Not my personal favorite. I know if you're a patron and you were in the chat, you know what my personal favorite was. But pretty cool. And there was a bunch of options on there. I honestly thought Wyatt Earp was going to win. But he didn't win. I honestly thought that he would, or Doc Holliday. A lot of people like Doc Holliday. But no, it was Teddy Roosevelt, which is cool. Not my personal favorite. Actually, my personal favorite was another American president. But anyway, you want to learn that, then you should be a patron and be in the chat. But just one of the fun things that we do. And one of the polls, or one of the questions that I pose is not a poll. I'm doing a current poll right now on what maybe the options would be. But one thing I'm considering is I might do an episode on the philosophy, but a modern fighting revolver. And I guess I should specify that. Modern fighting revolver, is it relevant? Is it a thing? Should it be a thing, or should we just let it go? Like, is it completely obsolete? Is it obsolescent? Is it not worth pursuing? Or is a modern fighting revolver a concept worth pursuing in 2024? Is it even worth it? And I should specify what that means. Like, I'm a big fan of personal protection revolvers. I love a J-frame. I will routinely carry a J-frame. Not generally. Generally, I carry a full-size fighting handgun. But sometimes, I'm talking about like going out and doing wind sprints or something like that. Uber small, super small carry at the gym. Things like that. Right? A ultralight 357 Magnum. J-frame in the pocket. 11 and something ounces. 5 rounds of 357. It's better than no gun. And it's a decent close quarters fighting handgun. Again, if you got decent hand-to-hand fighting skills and stuff like that, revolvers have a lot of advantage in that extreme close-in combat type scenario, which I've talked about before. I'm not going to get into. And that's one thing. And I think those absolutely are still relevant in 2024. But what about a fighting revolver? Whereas I think the ultralight J-frames are an advanced and kind of a master's gun to use well for personal protection. What about a fighting revolver? And by fighting revolver, I don't just mean protecting yourself in a Donnybrook. I mean preserving others' lives. I mean taking out threats that are threats to other people where you might encounter greater distances. Something like you're on a church security team. You carry, like I do, not just to protect yourself, but to protect others. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not going to, and it also says you shall not stand idly by while somebody takes the life of your neighbor. That's the word of God there. Other translations may have that differently, but I like that. I like the way that's worded. You shall not stand idly by while somebody takes the life of your neighbor. Right? If I'm loving my neighbor as myself, truly, if somebody was taking my life, I would kill them. Unless it was some kind of martyr scenario where I was advancing the gospel of Christ. Hopefully I'd have the courage to die for that. But if somebody's trying to take my life, they better bring their A game, right? Because I'm bringing mine by God's grace. You want to come at me, you better bring it, because I'm going to bring it. And God's will be done there. But I feel the same way about somebody else's life. If somebody's going to take somebody else's life, I'm going to try and intervene there too, because I'm loving my neighbor as myself. Preserving life is a loving thing, and if that means I got to change somebody's behavior and they die because of it because they were trying to kill other people, I mean, they did that. They killed themselves. They made that choice, right? But in the scenarios where I'm defending somebody else's life, it's likely not going to be a hand-to-hand fighting kind of situation. I might want more. And so what I'm talking about by a modern fighting revolver is better than a J-frame. And I love a J-frame, but I mean better at shooting, better at follow-up shots, better at getting quick hits, because a J-frame's crazy accurate. It's probably one of the most accurate handguns I have. But it takes a long time to line up a good accurate shot. You have a super small sight radius, a short barrel. So I'm going to define a modern fighting revolver as 5 to 8 shots. No, scratch that. 6 to 8 shots. Better than a J-frame, right? 6 to 8 shots of 38 Special 357 or 5 to 6 shots of 44 Special 44 Magnum. And a 3 to 6 inch barrel. I should probably say 3 to 5. 6 inches is probably too long. I've carried 6 inches revolvers before. That's almost certainly mostly an open carry thing. They just get long and heavy. There may be some exceptions, but so let's say if we're talking 38 special, and it may differ if you're talking 44 special, 44 mag, but 38 357. Let's say 6 to 8 rounds of 38 Special 357 and a 3 to 5 inch barrel, a modern fighting revolver. Is that even a thing worth pursuing? And this is something I've been throwing around in the chat with the guys. The reason I ask is before I left, I went on a road trip, if you don't know, to help out some people by God's grace, not really a place I wanted to be or wanted to go, but you try and go where you're needed, not where you want to go all the time. That's a good man, does what he should do, not what he wants to do all the time. That's what little kids do, right? When you're a man, you put away childish things and do what you're supposed to do, not what you want to do. But anyway, I kind of got off track there. Forgot what I was talking about. Modern fighting revolvers. Oh, when I left, I took a couple of guns that I wasn't using. I'm not a gun collector, I'm a gun fighter. I had a couple of gun redundancies, especially with short shells. I figured if I'm shooting short 12 gauges, the 20 gauge doesn't make a lot of sense to me anymore. I took in my 20 gauge shotgun and one of my Kimber hunting guiding rifles, because I'm not guiding right now. Took those in, and they both sold. The Kimber sold like the first day. Maybe I should have priced it higher. I guess I didn't take inflation into account. But I sold a couple of guns, which means I got some money in, by God's grace, to gun fund. Is the modern fighting revolver something worth pursuing? Or is it just doesn't make any sense? Is there anything, and I know the answer that there are some things, but there are some things that a revolver does better than a semi-auto. But in totality, does it even make sense in 2024 to pursue a modern fighting revolver? Is that even a thing, or is that an oxymoron? Is modern revolver kind of like healthy little Debbie snack? Like, no, they're just one or the other, bro. Like, is modern fighting revolver even a thing worth pursuing? That's a question that I asked the patrons, right? It's not just me in there, right? And if I do it, hopefully I'll be able to pass the information on to you guys. First of all, the tribe, as to what I learned from going down this road, if I do decide to pursue a modern fighting revolver. But is it even a thing worth pursuing? That's something I asked. And then I put in a poll about, what do you guys think? Modern fighting revolver. What would, I just had them vote 6 to 8 shot 357 38 special, or 5 to 6 shot 44 special 44 magnum, because those you can kind of get on a similar sized frame in a decent weight revolver, like a revolver that I would actually carry. And I kind of know the weight and size that I actually would carry, because I carry day to day and have been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. So I kind of know the size and weight that I'm actually going to carry versus one that's good in theory, but one that I would actually carry. And I can get kind of those options. I can get 6 to 8 shots of 38 special 357 magnum, or I could get 4 to 6 shots of 44 special 44 magnum. Is that even worth pursuing? And which one would you pick? Anyway, this is something we're talking about in the chat. So that's just some things that we talk about in the chat, and some things we talk about on the Patreon page. Some of that came from like comments on the Patreon page. Anyway, if you feel like you're missing out on that, because we talk about, this is just little things over the last couple of days. Right? I didn't even go back very far. So things we talk about all the time. If you want to be part of a group like that, a tribe like that, again, not as good as like a face-to-face interaction mag, which there might be one of those forming of people that live in the Northeast in our community. That's not going to be up to me. That's going to be up to somebody else to step up, because I don't live in the Northeast, to take charge of that if they want to. However, that would be really cool if there's like a face-to-face mutual assistance group. But other than that, like an actual tribe of people that care about each other and try to help each other, of like-minded, strong Christian warrior men. If you want to be part of that, consider becoming a patron. There should be a link in the show notes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little bit of extra answers on this Q&A. And if you're already a patron, just thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. I really do. It means a lot to me. Okay, I am humbled and blessed by all that you do. I appreciate you. And with that, the tactical verse today is going to be a classic. Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle.